In the hush before dawn's blade kisses the frost, a single drop of dew trembled on the executioner's axe, mirroring the fragile thread of a life about to sever. Neria Vale knelt upon the frost-laced steps of Eldridge Keep, her knees numb against the unyielding stone that bit like winter's teeth. The air hung heavy with the scent of pine smoke and iron. Blood from the night's purges still lingered in the wind, carried from the shadowed alleys below. At 23, she was no stranger to the chill of rejection. It had woven itself into her bones long before this moment. Born an Omega in the fractured packs of the Northern Reach, she had learned early that tenderness was a luxury afforded only to those with claws sharp enough to claim it. Her own had been dulled by mercy, by the quiet act of sheltering the hunted, fugitives from the civil purge that tore through the realms like a wolf devouring its tail. The capital sprawled before her in the dim pre-light, a labyrinth of spires etched against the indigo sky, their tips crowned with the first hesitant glow of morning. Torches flickered along the battlements, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters over the gathered crowd. They were a sea of faces, alphas with jaws set in righteous fury, betas murmuring prayers to the Luna goddess, and omegas like her, eyes downcast, wondering whose turn would come next. The purge had claimed hundreds, traitors they called them, though Neria knew the truth was bloodier, woven from rival kings' ambitions and the endless hunger for power. She had hidden 3 in her modest hearthside hovel, a scarred beta healer, his mate heavy with child, and a young pup whose wide eyes still haunted her dreams. For that sin of compassion, the High Council had branded her a conspirator, stripping her of pack ties, her meager belongings scattered to the winds like ash. Her wrists bound behind her with coarse rope that chafed her skin raw, Neria lifted her gaze to the horizon. The moon, that eternal sentinel, clung low and pale, reluctant to yield to the encroaching sun. It had always been her silent confidant, whispering through the veils of night about destinies unspoken, paths untrodden. As an Omega, she bore no mark of the elite, no glowing runes of command etched into her flesh. But in quiet moments, she felt its pull, a subtle hum in her veins like the distant call of wolves across frozen tundras. Now it watched impassively as the executioner approached, his boots crunching the thin crust of snow that dusted the steps. He was a mountain of a man, his armor gleaming dully under the torchlight, the Luna's crescent etched into his breastplate, a mocking irony. In his gloved hands, the axe rested heavy, its edge honed to a whisper of death. The crowd fell silent, breaths held in collective anticipation, the only sound the faint whistle of wind threading through the keep's towers. Neria's heart pounded, a wild drum against her ribs, each beat echoing the regret that clawed at her chest. Not for the act itself, she would harbor them again, damn the consequences, but for the life it stole from her. No mate to claim her, no legacy to leave, just this cold end, her blood to stain the steps as a warning to others who dared defy the hierarchy. The executioner raised the blade, the motion deliberate, shadows pooling beneath it like spilled ink. Time slowed, the world narrowing to the glint of steel, the frost crystals fracturing under the subtle shift of her weight. She closed her eyes, not in fear, but in surrender, imagining the moon's silver light bathing her in one final embrace. A prayer formed on her lips, unspoken. Goddess, if mercy is your weave, let it be mine in this unraveling. The axe descended, but it did not bite. A gasp rippled through the throng as the blade halted mid-air, inches from her neck. Neria's eyes snapped open, her breath catching in her throat. There, shimmering between steel and skin, hovered a barrier of pure silver light, ethereal, unyielding, like moonlight solidified into shield. It pulsed faintly, warm against the morning's bite, sending a tremor through her body that was neither pain nor chill, but something deeper, a recognition. The executioner's arms strained, veins bulging against the resistance, his face twisting in confusion and then alarm. The axe trembled, caught in an invisible vice, as if the very air conspired against it. Murmurs erupted into cries, some of awe, others of blasphemy. "The goddess!" a voice wailed from the crowd. "She shields the traitor!" High above, on the keep's parapets, the council elders leaned forward, their faces pale masks of dread. The purge was law, decreed by the Alpha King himself, a bulwark against the civil wars that had ravaged the Pax for a decade. Fugitives harbored meant alliances broken, borders breached. Her death was to be the seal on that decree. Yet here, in the fragile truce of dawn, divinity intervened, not with thunderous dissent or fiery judgment, but with quiet protection, a veil that no mortal force could pierce. Neria felt it then, the hum in her veins intensifying, threading through her like roots seeking soil. The silver light warmed her skin, chasing away the frost's grasp, and for a fleeting instant she glimpsed visions. A shadowed figure fleeing through snow-swept pines, eyes haunted by ghosts. A crown heavy with unspoken oaths, blood on white fur under a blood moon. They flickered and faded, leaving her breathless, her bound hands clenching against the rope. The executioner staggered back, dropping the axe with a clang that echoed like a tolling bell. The barrier held, a luminous arc encircling her neck, defying the first rays of sun that now crested the mountains, painting the steps in gold and crimson. The crowd surged, a tide of confusion and fervor, as guards pushed forward, spears lowered, but Neria remained kneeling, untouched, her mind reeling. Mercy from the divine was no boon. It was a curse, a spotlight on the fragile line between law and fate. What truth had the goddess unveiled here, in this moment of suspended death? And at what cost would it demand her soul? The wind howled softly, carrying the distant weevo of wolves, as if the wilds themselves bore witness to the unraveling. The guards' spears formed a cage of steel around Neria as the silver barrier faded, dissolving into motes of light that drifted like snowflakes caught in the dawn's breath. She rose unsteadily, her legs protesting the hours of kneeling, the ropes still biting into her wrists like forgotten promises. The crowd's fervor had twisted into a storm of whispers and shouts, some hailing her as blessed, others cursing her as a witch who had ensnared the goddess's favor. But the elders on the parapets, their faces carved from granite and regret, issued the decree with voices that cut sharper than any axe. Exile, not death, for the divine had claimed that right, but banishment to the forsaken fringes of the northern reach, where the wilds devoured the weak and the guilty alike. Her crime compounded now. Harboring fugitives was treason, surviving judgment was heresy. They marched her through the keep's iron gates under a sky bleeding into pale blue, the sun's rays mocking the moon's retreat. Eldridge's spires receded behind her, their shadows long and accusatory, while the wind whipped her threadbare cloak like a flag of surrender. The air tasted of salt and pine, laced with the metallic tang of fear sweat from the guards flanking her. Neria's bare feet sank into the crust of snow along the mountain path, each step a needle of cold that pierced deeper than the chill of rejection. She had known exile before, in the quiet ways of an Omega overlooked, passed over for mates, dismissed in council fires. But this was a stripping bare, her pack bonds severed like threads snapped by frost. The hum in her veins lingered, a faint echo of the silver shield, warming her core against the encroaching freeze, yet it offered no comfort. What mercy was this? To spare her neck, only to thrust her into the maw of wilderness? The path wound downward from the capital's heights, carving through jagged peaks where ancient glaciers wept into ravines. Flurries danced in erratic swirls, veiling the world in white veils that muffled the distant clamor of the city. Neria's breath fogged the air, her exhales ragged, carrying the weight of unspoken questions. Why her? The visions from the barrier haunted her steps. A shadowed figure, cloaked in midnight fur, eyes like storm-tossed seas, the glint of a crown amid thorns of ice, blood blooming on pristine snow under a moon swollen with secrets. They flickered at the edges of her sight, unbidden, as if the goddess had etched them into her soul without consent. Her hands, freed now but marked with rope burns, clenched at her sides. Strength, she thought, was not in claws or crowns, but in enduring the unraveling, choosing to walk when every instinct screamed to curl into the snow and fade. Hours blurred into a haze of ascent and descent, the guards' boots crunching a relentless rhythm behind her. The northern reach unfolded in brutal beauty. Forests of sentinel pines bowed under snow's burden, their branches whispering secrets to the wind. Frozen streams that sang of hidden depths, their surfaces cracking like fragile oaths. The cold seeped into her marrow, a lover's cruel embrace, numbing her lips and fingertips until sensation became a distant memory. Yet the hum persisted, a subtle pulse syncing with her heartbeat, drawing her gaze to the horizon where the mountains clawed at the heavens. It was there, in a cleft shadowed by overhanging cliffs, that the first sign of pursuit or peril emerged. A low growl rippled through the air, not from the guards, but from the underbrush, where brambles tangled like forgotten vendettas. The men halted, spears raised, their breaths sharpening into wary silence. Neria froze, her skin prickling as if the wind itself carried eyes. From the gloom staggered a figure, massive even in collapse, his form cloaked in a mantle of dark fur matted with crimson streaks. Blood, fresh, coppery, staining the snow in erratic patterns, trailed his path. He was no mere wanderer. The air around him thrummed with alpha essence, raw and commanding, yet fractured. Like a storm held in check by invisible chains. His head lifted, revealing eyes of molten silver, rimmed with the exhaustion of one who had run from shadows longer than memory. The guards tensed, murmuring of rogue wolves and purge stragglers. But Neria felt the pull before reason could intervene, an instinctive tether, yanking at her core like the moon's inexorable draw. He was wounded, a gash across his shoulder exposing muscle and sinew, the scent of his blood mingling with the wild musk of pine and earth. Curse or flight, it mattered not. He was the shadow from her vision, the one with the haunted gaze. "Halt!" one guard barked, advancing, but the Alpha's eyes locked on hers, a flicker of recognition passing between them, unspoken and electric. Fear coiled in her belly, mingling with a curiosity that bordered on madness. Who was he, this broken king of the wilds, to stir the hum into a roar within her? He collapsed to one knee, breath heaving as the guards closed in. Neria's lips parted, a warning forming unbidden, but the wind howled louder, drowning her voice, carrying the faint, distant uivo of a pack on the hunt. The Alpha's hand extended, not in threat, but plea, his fingers brushing the snow inches from her feet. In that touch of proximity, the silver hum surged, weaving between them like threads of fate, binding stranger to stranger in the heart of exile's embrace. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The Alpha's plea hung in the frozen air like a fragile vow, his extended hand trembling not from weakness, but from the raw effort of restraint. Neria's breath caught, the silver hum in her veins surging into a torrent that drowned the guard's advancing snarls. She stepped forward, unthinking, her bare feet crunching the snow into diamonds under the midday pallor, placing herself between the wounded stranger and the spear tips glinting like accusations. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible over the wind's rising lament, yet it carried the weight of the goddess's own shield, halting the men mid-stride. The lead guard, his face scarred from old pack skirmishes, narrowed his eyes, the crescent emblem on his pauldron catching the weak sun. Step aside, exile. This one's marked for the purge. Rogue Alpha, fleeing the king's hunt. His voice was gravel under boot, laced with the bitterness of duty that masked deeper fears. Behind him, the others shifted, spears forming a bristling wall, their breaths fogging in unison like a chorus of doubt. The Alpha knelt unmoving, his silver eyes fixed on Neria's, a storm of unspoken burdens swirling within them. Guilt etched in the lines of his jaw, the faint tremor of a crown's invisible weight. He was no ordinary fugitive. The air around him pulsed with the restrained fury of one born to command, now leashed by wounds that wept crimson into the white. From the tree line, the distant huevos sharpened into a frenzy, a pack's hunt closing like jaws on prey. Not wolves of the wild, but enforcers, shadows of the civil purge, their howls laced with the metallic edge of steel and ambition. The guards whirled, spears redirecting toward the encroaching threat, but it was too late. Figures burst from the pines, lean, fur-clad hunters with eyes gleaming feral under hooded cloaks, their blades drawn and thirsty. The first clash erupted in a spray of snow and blood, a guard's cry cut short as a dagger found his throat, the red bloom stark against the frost. Neria recoiled, the acrid scent of spilled life flooding her senses, but the Alpha's hand closed around her ankle, gentle, yet iron, pulling her down beside him into the shelter of a snow-mounded boulder. "Run with me," he rasped. His voice a low rumble like thunder trapped in chest, warm breath ghosting her ear amid the chaos. She could have fled alone, the exile's path still open before her, but the hum wove tighter, binding her hesitation into resolve. Empathy flickered, unbidden. In his gaze, she saw her own rejection mirrored. Not the petty slights of an overlooked Omega, but the shattering weight of a king who had failed his realm. The purge's architect, perhaps, or its victim. It mattered little now as arrows whistled past, embedding in bark with lethal whispers. Together, they scrambled into the ravine's throat, the Alpha's arm slung over her shoulder, his bulk a furnace against her side, despite the gash that soaked her cloak in warmth she dared not name. The wound's heat seeped through fabric, mingling with her own pulse, a visceral reminder that survival demanded touch, however fraught. The pursuer's shouts echoed behind, boots pounding the snow into slush, but the cleft narrowed into a labyrinth of ice-sheathed rocks, veiling their flight in crystalline veils. Neria's lungs burned, each inhale a blade of cold, yet she pressed on, guiding him by instinct. The hum now a compass, pointing to hidden crevices where moonlight pooled even in day, remnants of the goddess's gaze. They collapsed into a shallow cave, its mouth curtained by icicles that chimed like forsaken bells in the wind's sigh. The Alpha slumped against the wall, his dark fur mantle parting to reveal the regal torque around his neck, a circlet of ancient silver, etched with lunar phases, dulled by blood and exile. It was the symbol, recurring in her visions, the Luna's chain, binding duty to destiny. Neria tore a strip from her cloak, pressing it to his shoulder, her fingers slick with his essence. The metallic tang filled the dim space, mingling with the earthy damp of stone and the faint, wild scent of him, pine resin and storm-swept fur. "Who hunts you so fiercely?" she murmured, her voice threading the silence, not accusation, but the quiet unraveling of walls. He winced, but his eyes held hers, silver depths reflecting the cave's faint glow. "The throne I left in ruin. The pack's fracture under rivals who whisper of my weakness, guilt for the purges I could not halt." His words were measured, laced with the melancholy of one who had wielded power only to watch it corrode the soul. Eric Stormcrown, he named himself then, the fallen Alpha King of the Northern Reach, marked by the Civil War's endless betrayals. No brute conqueror, but a guardian haunted by choices that had spilled rivers of blood, his ethics a cage as unyielding as his torque. Neria's hands stilled. The rope burns on her wrists, throbbing in sympathy. She knew that fracture, The Omega's quiet shame of mercy deemed weakness now echoed in a king's confession. Outside, the hunt's huevos faded into frustrated echoes, the common enemy forging their fragile alliance. Empathy bloomed in the shared silence, her touch lingering as she bound his wound, the silver hum softening into a bridge. Not love, not yet, resisted in the rational corners of her mind, where exile whispered of solitude's safety. But a bond, tentative as first frost, transforming fear into the warmth of mutual shelter. Eric's hand covered hers, calloused yet tender, the torque's cool metal brushing her skin like a promise. In that cave's hush, under the weight of mountains and moons, Neria felt the first stir of renascimento, not in triumph, but in the raw choice to heal what the wilds had broken. The wind outside softened to a whisper, carrying the scent of approaching dusk, as if the goddess herself paused to witness their fragile truce. The cave's dim hollow cradled them like a forgotten womb, its walls slick with meltwater that wept in rhythmic drips, echoing the unsteady cadence of Irik's breath. Neria knelt beside him, her fingers still laced with the alpha's blood, the metallic warmth cooling into a sticky accusation on her skin. The torque around his neck gleamed faintly in the encroaching twilight, filtering through the icicle veil, its lunar etchings catching stray glimmers like veins of trapped moonlight. She had bound his wound as best she could with the remnants of her cloak, the fabric now a sodden rag pressed against the ragged tear in his shoulder. Pain radiated from it in waves she could almost taste, sharp, copper-edged, mingling with the cave's damp earthiness and the faint underlying musk of his presence, wild and restrained. Eric's silver eyes, half-lidded now in exhaustion, traced her face with the intensity that made her pulse stutter. "You should have left me to the spears," he murmured, his voice a gravelly thread woven through the silence. "An exile aiding a fallen king. The goddess mocks us both." There was no command in his tone, only the quiet fracture of a man who had long worn guilt like armor, heavier than any crown. Neria met his gaze. The silver hum in her veins no longer a distant echo, but an insistent tide rising with each shared breath. She wanted to pull away, to rationalize this tether as mere survival's illusion, the wind's howl outside a reminder that trust was a luxury for those unscarred by betrayal. Yet her hand lingered on his chest, feeling the steady thrum beneath, a rhythm that synced with her own, pulling her deeper into the unraveling. As dusk deepened, the cave grew colder, the wind sighed beyond the entrance carrying the crisp bite of nightfall. Neria shifted to gather brittle twigs from the floor, her movements deliberate to mask the tremor in her limbs. She struck flint against steel, a small piece scavenged from the guards' discarded gear during their flight, coaxing sparks into a modest flame. The fire caught, hesitant at first, then blooming with a soft crackle that painted their faces in flickering gold and shadow. Warmth bloomed outward, chasing the chill from her bones. But it was the light's dance on Eric's torque that stirred something profound. The metal seemed to pulse in harmony with the flames, the crescent phases glowing as if awakened. And in that moment, the hum surged without warning, a violent cascade that blurred the boundaries of her sight. Visions crashed over her like an avalanche, unbidden and merciless. She gasped, clutching her temples as images flooded her mind. Eric enthroned in Eldridge Keep, not as the tyrant of purges, but as a young king forging fragile peace among warring packs, his hands stained with the blood of oaths broken by rivals. Then, the fracture, a betrayal in the council halls, whispers of ambition turning brothers to enemies, civil wars igniting like dry tinder under a blood moon. She saw him fleeing, not in cowardice, but to spare his realm further ruin, cursed by the Luna's own decree. A shadow king, his essence fractured until redemption claimed him. And woven through it all, a path, silver-threaded, branching like the roots of ancient pines, leading not to vengeance, but to mercy's crown. Her role in it flickered clearest, hands outstretched, guiding him through storms of ice and intrigue, her touch mending what power had torn. Neria's body arched, the fire's heat forgotten as she collapsed forward, her palms slamming against the cave floor. Rocks bit into her skin, drawing pinpricks of blood that mingled with the dirt, but the pain anchored her, pulling her back from the torrent. Eric was at her side in an instant, his uninjured arm encircling her waist, drawing her against him with a gentleness that belied his strength. "What haunts you?" he demanded, his voice laced with alarm, the torque cool against her cheek as he held her steady. The contact amplified the hum, the visions sharpening into clarity. She was the pathfinder, the Omega unmarked yet chosen, her gift a divine compass revealing destinies veiled by deception. Not a seer of futures, but of truths, the hidden paths where compassion triumphed over conquest, where guilt could forge renewal. Tears traced hot paths down her face, salting the wound on her lip from the flight. "I see. Your chains," she whispered, her voice raw, trembling with the weight of revelation. "Not just this metal, but the ones you carry inside. The purges weren't your will, the rivals twisted them, poisoned the packs against you. But there's a way through, Eric, a path of silver light, where you reclaim not by blade, but by forgiveness. And the goddess marked me for it, to guide you." The words spilled out, resisted even as they formed. She was no hero, just an exiled Omega whose mercy had nearly cost her everything. To bind her fate to his, a king's, fraught with wars and shadows, felt like stepping into the axe's shadow once more. Yet the hum affirmed it, a spiritual certainty blooming in her chest, warm as the fire's embrace. Eric stilled, his breath hitching as recognition dawned in his eyes. The torque warmed against her skin, as if the Luna herself acknowledged the truth. "The Pathfinder," he breathed, the title ancient, whispered in temple lore of Omegas who bridged worlds, revealing destinies to the worthy. His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing away a tear, the touch electric with possibility and peril. In his gaze, she saw the shift, not desire, but awe mingled with dread. The realization that she held the key to his redemption, yet claiming it demanded he confront the ghosts of his throne. Guilt warred with hope in his features, the melancholy lines deepening. "If this is fate's weave, then I've dragged you into my storm. But mercy, perhaps it crowns us both if we dare the path." The fire popped, sending embers spiraling upward like prayers to the unseen moon as the wind outside carried a lone Weevo, distant, watchful. Neria leaned into him, the bond no longer tentative but a quiet forge, her gift a double-edged blade, illumination for him, but a burden for her soul, forcing choices between her hard-won solitude and the destiny that now claimed her. In the cave's intimate glow, under the weight of revelations and rising night, she wondered if strength lay not in foresight, but in yielding to the light it cast. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna, if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw the cave's embers had died to a sullen glow by the time the first gray light of pre-dawn pierced the icicle curtain, casting elongated shadows that clawed at the walls like accusations from the wilds beyond. Neria stirred from a fitful sleep, her body curled against Eric's side, the torque's cool weight a constant presence between them. Its lunar etchings now seeming less like a chain and more like a map etched in silver, paths converging, destinies interlocking. The revelation of the night before lingered in her veins like a fever, the hum of her gift a persistent undercurrent, whispering of truths that demanded action. She was the pathfinder, marked not by scars or crowns, but by this inner light that revealed hidden ways. Yet knowledge without choice was a hollow mercy, and the weight of it pressed on her chest heavier than the mountain's frost. Eric rose before her, his movements fluid despite the bandaged wound, the alpha's innate strength reasserting itself like a river carving through ice. He stood at the cave's mouth, silhouetted against the paling sky, his breath fogging in rhythmic clouds as he scanned the ravine below. The air carried the sharp tang of impending snow, mingled with the faint, acrid smoke of distant fires, signals from the Purge's enforcers, perhaps, or the rivals who stalked his throne. "They come," he said quietly, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the stone, not turning to face her. "The pack I once led fractures further. My brother, Thorn, Ambition's blade, leads them now, twisting loyalty into vendetta. He claims the Purges as his justice, but it's power he craves, the Torque's promise, without its burden." Neria joined him, the cold stone biting her bare feet, sending shivers up her legs that had nothing to do with the chill. The Torque gleamed on his neck, a symbol that now haunted her visions. Not just his chain, but hers, binding her freedom to his redemption. Below, in the ravine's throat, figures moved like shadows detached from the dawn. Thorn's enforcers, their fur cloaks dusted with fresh snow, spears and axes catching the weak light in lethal glints. Weavos rose, not the wild cries of beasts, but the disciplined howls of a pack, honed for war, echoing off the cliffs in a symphony of pursuit. Her heart clenched, the hum surging in warning, painting paths in her mind. One of flight, solitary and safe, veering into the uncharted wilds where an omega could vanish like mist. Another, entwined with Eryx, leading back to Eldridge, through betrayal's heart, where forgiveness might mend or shatter all. "We can't outrun them forever," Eric continued, his silver eyes meeting hers, shadowed with the melancholy of a king who had chosen duty over desire too many times. "Thorn was my shadow once, blood-bound in the old rites. He betrayed me in the council, whispering poisons that ignited the civil wars, framed me as the Purge's architect to seize the throne. If we flee, he burns the reach in his image. If we confront—" His voice trailed, the torque warming against his skin as if the Luna stirred within it, urging a choice between war's crimson tide and compassion's fragile bridge. The hum intensified, visions flickering at the edges of Neria's sight. Thorn's face, sharp and unyielding, crowned in mock silver amid flames that devoured pack halls. Irix's hand extended in the past, offering alliance, only to be met with a dagger's gleam, and then a silver path, her guidance revealing the traitor's hidden allies, the pack's divided loyalties, a way to expose the lies without spilling more blood. But it demanded her voice, her light, in the heart of confrontation. Freedom tugged at her, the exile's instinct to slip away, to reclaim the solitude that had shielded her from rejection's sting. Love, or whatever this bond was, resisted and rationalized as mere fate's cruel jest, whispered of union, of walking the path with him, proving that mercy could redeem even a fallen realm. Yet war loomed, its cost etched in the bloodstains on her hands from the day before, a visceral reminder that choices carved souls as deeply as blades carved flesh. They descended the ravine together, the snow yielding underfoot with soft crunches that betrayed their steps, the wind whipping flurries into their faces like needles of doubt. Eric's presence beside her was a furnace, his scent, pine and storm, grounding her amid the rising clamor. The enforcers spotted them midway, a shout splitting the air, followed by the thunder of boots and the whistle of arrows slicing the chill. Neria's breath came in sharp bursts, her body moving on instinct, the hum guiding her to a narrow ledge where boulders formed a natural barricade. They pressed against it, hearts pounding in sync as the pack closed in, a dozen strong, led by Thorn himself, his frame broad and armored in steel, etched with rival crescents, eyes burning with the fervor of one who saw betrayal as destiny's gift. "Brother!" Thorn called, his voice booming across the snowfield, laced with false sorrow. "You've dragged an exile into your madness? The packs demand your head for the purges you unleashed. Step forward and spare the Omega your curse." His gaze flicked to Neria, dismissive yet probing, as if sensing the hum's subtle glow. The enforcers fanned out, forming a semicircle of steel and snarls, their breaths visible like ghosts in the cold dawn. Eric tensed, his hand hovering near the dagger at his belt, but he held, the torque pulsing warmly, a silent plea from the goddess for restraint. Neria's mind raced, the visions clarifying. Thorn's alliance with southern rivals, smuggling weapons under the guise of peace, the pack's elders coerced by fear, not loyalty. She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs, the silver light flickering faintly around her like an aura of frost-kissed moonlight. "The purges weren't his will," she declared, the words carrying on the wind, amplified by the hum into something ethereal, drawing gasps from the enforcers. Thorn twisted the council's oaths, ignited the wars for his crown. "I see the paths, silver truths hidden in your shadows. Forgive the fracture, expose the poison, or watch the reach burn in endless vendetta." Thorn's laugh was a bark, cold and cutting, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes as the torque on Irik's neck gleamed brighter, reflecting her light. The pack shifted, murmurs rippling like cracks in ice, some lowering weapons, others gripping tighter, the air thick with the scent of pine smoke from their torches and the underlying copper of impending blood. Eric's hand found hers, a squeeze that grounded the storm within, his guilt warring with resolve. "She's the Pathfinder," he said, voice resonant, carrying the weight of his throne's lost honor, chosen by the Luna to reveal what ambition blinds. Brother, choose, war that devours us all, or mercy that rebuilds. The wind howled, carrying distant weavos from the fractured packs beyond as Thorn advanced, blade drawn, his face a mask of rage and doubt. Neria's heart thundered, the moral precipice yawning beneath her. To guide toward forgiveness meant risking her light in the fray, binding her freedom to their blood-tied storm. To withdraw, to choose liberty, would doom the path to darkness, her gift unclaimed. In that suspended breath, under the moon's fading gaze bleeding into sun, she felt the torque's echo in her soul, a chain of choice, where love's redemption demanded the courage to face the blade not with steel, but with unyielding truth. The first snowflake fell, soft and inexorable, as Thorn's shadow loomed, the dilemma etching itself into the frost like an eternal question. Could compassion crown where power failed? Thorn's blade caught the dawn's fragile light, a sliver of steel that promised severance as surely as the executioner's axe had once loomed over Neria's neck. The snowflake that heralded the storm melted on her cheek, cold and fleeting, mirroring the precarious balance of this moment, truth teetering on the edge of blood. The ravine's air thickened with tension, the enforcers' torches sputtering in the rising wind, casting erratic shadows that twisted like the fractures in Irik's fractured rein. Neria's hand remained clasped in his, the torque's warmth pulsing through their joined skin, a silent invocation of the Luna's weave. She could feel the paths branching in her mind's eye, silver veins amid the crimson haze of potential violence, one leading to slaughter, where Thorn's ambition drowned the packs in endless winter, another, faint and luminous, where exposure of his deceptions unraveled the lies without claiming more souls. "Pathfinder?" Thorn sneered, his voice a whip-crack across the snowfield. But the word hung heavier than intended, stirring unease among his men. Their eyes darted between the brothers, loyalty fraying like rope worn by frost. Some gripped weapons tighter, others let spears dip, the scent of doubt mingling with the sharp pine and smoldering wood smoke. Thorn advanced, boots sinking into the fresh powder with deliberate crunches. His armor, adorned with rival crescents, forged in southern fires, clinking like a dirge. Up close, his face bore the scars of shared blood, a jagged line across his brow from a boyhood hunt, now twisted by the hardness of betrayal. "An Omega's delusions won't save you, brother," The purges cleansed the weak. Your mercy invited the chaos. Step aside, or I'll carve the truth from her throat myself. Eric's body tensed beside Neria, muscles coiling like a bowstring drawn to breaking, his free hand inching toward the dagger at his belt. The torque burned against his collarbone, a counterpoint to the chill seeping through her threadbare shift, urging restraint, even as rage flickered in his silver eyes. Guilt warred within him. She could sense it through their bond, a storm of regrets for the wars he hadn't quelled, the pacts he'd failed to unite. "The truth is yours to bear, Thorn," he replied, his tone steady, resonant with the melancholy depth of a king long haunted by duty's blade. "You poisoned the council with whispers of southern gold, smuggled arms under peace banners. I see it now, through her light, the paths you hid. End this vendetta. Expose the rivals who pull your strings, and reclaim honor without more graves." The wind howled in response, whipping flurries into a veil that blurred the enforcers' faces, their weavos faltering into murmurs. Neria's heart thundered, the hum amplifying every sensation. The metallic tang of fear sweat from the pack, the earthy musk of Eric's resolve pressing against her side, the faint, underlying warmth of the torque as if the Luna breathed through it. Her gift surged unbidden, painting visions sharper than before. Thorn in shadowed tents with foreign envoys, maps stained with ink and blood, elders coerced by threats to their pups. A silver thread leading to the heart of Eldridge, where a single confession could shatter the purge's facade. But to voice it fully meant stepping into the fray, her light exposed like a beacon in the storm, risking the very freedom exile had promised. Compassion tugged at her, a redemptive pull toward union with Eric, where love proved not a chain but a forge for broken souls. Yet liberty whispered of retreat, of vanishing into the wilds unburdened, her mercy preserved for herself alone. Thorn halted paces away, his blade lowering fractionally, eyes narrowing on the faint glow emanating from Neria's skin, a subtle shimmer like moonlight on fresh snow. "Prove it," he demanded, the challenge laced with a flicker of desperation, ambition cracking under the weight of her revelations. "Show these fools your so-called paths, Omega, or die as the liar you are." His enforcers shifted, a low growl rippling through them, but hesitation bloomed. Two lowered their weapons entirely, drawn by the torque's insistent gleam sinking with her aura. Neria swallowed the knot in her throat, the cold air scraping her lungs like shards of ice. Strength, she realized in that suspended breath, was not the Alpha's roar or the King's decree, but the quiet choice to illuminate shadows at personal cost. She released Eric's hand, stepping forward into the open, the snow yielding softly under her feet, as if the earth itself yielded to her resolve. The hum crested, a tidal wave of silver light that spilled from her palms, weaving ethereal threads into the air, visible now to all, tracing the hidden betrayals like luminous scars. Visions projected outward, ghostly yet undeniable. Thorn's clandestine meetings, the Southern blades hidden in supply wagons, the coerced oaths that had ignited the civil wars. Gasps echoed from the pack, weapons clattering to the frost as truths unraveled the veil of loyalty. Thorn staggered, his face paling to the white of fresh powder, blade slipping from numb fingers to embed in the snow with a muffled thud. "Lies," he rasped, but his voice broke, the mask of certainty crumbling into raw exposure. Eric moved then, not in attack, but to clasp his brother's arm, the torque bridging them in a pulse of shared blood and divine mercy. No more blood for thrones, Thorn. Choose the path she shows, redemption, not ruin. The enforcers knelt, one by one, the wind dying to a hush as the silver light faded, leaving the ravine bathed in dawn's honest glow. Neria trembled, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave, but Eric caught her, his embrace an anchor amid the shifting tides. The moral precipice had been crossed, not with war's fury, but with compassion's quiet blade, severing chains of deception. Yet as Thorn's eyes met hers, haunted now by the mirror of his own guilt, she felt the stir of Renacimiento's edge, forgiveness offered, but fragile, demanding they all walk the silver path together or watch it dissolve into winter's grasp. The distant weavos of the fractured packs softened into calls of return, the torque warming against her cheek as Eric held her close. The bond no longer resisted, but embraced, a redemptive flame kindled in the heart of judgment's storm. In that fragile truce, under the moon's retreating gaze yielding to sun, Neria wondered if true power lay not in crowns or claws, but in the mercy that bound the broken, forging destiny from the ashes of choice. The first rays crested the peaks, painting the snow in golds and crimsons. As the brothers turned toward Eldridge, the Omega's light, their unyielding guide. The journey back to Eldridge unfolded like a tapestry woven from frost and fragile hope, the ravine's shadows yielding to the broader sweeps of the northern reach where pines stood sentinel under a sky bruised with the promise of more snow. Neria walked at Iric's side, her steps measured against the crunch of fresh powder, the torque's subtle warmth a constant echo against her senses, as if the Luna had etched its phases into her own pulse. Thorn trailed behind with the reformed enforcers, his silence a heavy shroud, broken only by the occasional murmur of reluctant oaths renewed. The silver light of her gift had dimmed to a quiet ember within, exhausted from the revelation that had shattered the veil of betrayal. Yet it lingered, a compass pointing inexorably toward the capital's spires, now visible on the horizon like jagged teeth gnashing at the heavens. The air grew thicker with each mile, laced with the metallic bite of distant forges and the underlying rot of the purge's aftermath, smoke from razed villages curling like ghosts into the wind. Neria's bare feet, numb yet resilient, left faint imprints in the snow, each one a testament to the rebirth stirring in her core. Exile had stripped her, rejection had hollowed her, but this path, guided by her hidden sight, reclaimed her not as victim, but as architect of fates. Iric's presence beside her was no longer a resisted tether, but an accepted forge, his hand brushing hers in unspoken solidarity, the calluses of a king's burdens rough against her skin. Love, she understood now, was no swift flame, but a slow burn, kindled in the crucible of shared wounds, proving redemption through endurance rather than conquest. As dusk bled into the valleys, the first howls rose, not of pursuit, but of wary welcome from fractured packs gathering at the borders, drawn by whispers of the brothers' return. Eldridge loomed, its frost-laced walls a labyrinth of memory, the steps where her neck had been spared, the keep where councils had twisted mercy into treason. Torches blazed along the battlements, their flames leaping like defiant hearts against the encroaching night, casting the world in hues of gold and crimson that danced across the snow. The torque on Iric's neck caught the firelight, its lunar crescents pulsing as if alive, sinking with the moon's slow ascent, a pale orb rising to claim the sky, bathing the procession in silver that chased away the day's lingering chill. They entered through the iron gates, under a hush broken only by the wind's sigh and the muffled thud of boots on stone. The High Council awaited in the grand hall, elders arrayed like statues carved from ice, their faces etched with the scars of civil strife, eyes hollow from losses they had rationalized as necessary. Thorn stepped forward first, his voice raw, stripped of ambition's veneer. "The paths she revealed are true," he confessed, the words hanging heavy, amplified by the hall's vaulted arches. "Southern blades in our veins, coerced oaths that poisoned the purges. I chose power over kin." Gasps rippled through the assembly, but Neria's hum stirred, weaving silver threads invisible to most, illuminating the elders' hidden doubts, visions of pups orphaned by the wars, alliances frayed by greed. Compassion, not vengeance, was the blade she offered now, exposing without destroying, guiding toward a mending that demanded sacrifice from all. Eirik ascended the dais, the torque gleaming under the torchlight, his silver eyes sweeping the hall with the melancholy resolve of one who had tasted guilt's abyss. The Luna shielded her not for judgment, but for renewal, he declared, his voice resonant, carrying the weight of a throne reclaimed not by force, but by truth. He turned to Neria, extending a hand, the gesture simple yet profound, a bridge from Omega's shadow to the heart of power. The hall fell silent, breaths held like prayers, the air thick with the scent of beeswax and iron, the faint copper tang of old blood embedded in the stones. She hesitated, the moral precipice yawning once more. To claim this union meant forsaking the wild solitude, binding her gift to a realm's healing, where freedom dissolved into destiny's weave. Sacrifice tugged at her. Her light, once private, now a beacon for the broken packs, demanding she yield the exile's quiet mercy for the collective's roar. Yet faith, that quiet fire against despair, won. Neria placed her hand in his, the contact igniting the hum into a cascade of warmth that spread through the hall like dawn's first blush. Silver light bloomed from their joined palms, ethereal tendrils tracing the fractures in the assembly, revealing paths of forgiveness, elders confessing coerced loyalties, packs vowing oaths anew under the moon's impartial gaze, Thorn kneeling not in defeat, but in rebirth, his scars a map to shared redemption. The torque warmed, its phases completing a cycle as Eirik drew her close, his lips brushing her temple in a kiss that tasted of pine and storm, sealing the bond with a tenderness born of trials. No grand declarations, only the visceral press of his heartbeat against hers, the wind outside howling in approval as snow began to fall, veiling the world in white renewal. The packs gathered in the courtyard as midnight crested, weavos rising in harmony under the full moon. A symphony of howls that shook the spires, blood and fire forgotten in the face of unity, forged from choice. Neria stood at Eirik's side on the steps where her execution had faltered, now a throne of sorts, the frost yielding to their warmth. Her gift pulsed gently, no longer a burden, but a crown of light, guiding the northern reach toward a dawn untainted by Purge's shadow. Love had proven itself not as reward, but as the ultimate proof, redemption's quiet alchemy, transmuting rejection into renascimento, guilt into grace. In his arms, under the moon's benevolent watch, she felt the wild's call soften to a whisper, destiny and freedom entwined like roots in fertile snow. The flames of bonfires crackled below, painting faces in gold and shadow as the first flakes melted on her skin, warm with promise. Strength, she knew, was mercy's crown, chosen, not seized, and in that eternal hush between howl and heart, the goddess smiled upon the healed. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.